A director's bear attack, so realistic audiences thought it was actual footage. A spaghetti western so graphic it was banned in multiple countries for decades. And a Sam Peckinpah bloodbath that got theater owners dragged into court for showing it. These are 10 westerns that were too violent for theaters. Number 10, The Revenant, 2015. Alejandro Gonzalez. Iñárritu's survival epic isn't your typical western, but it belongs on this list because of one scene that had audiences fleeing theaters in horror, the bear attack. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Hugh Glass, a frontiersman mauled by a grizzly and left for dead by his companions in 1823. The attack sequence runs nearly 10 minutes and is so visceral, so brutally realistic, that multiple reports emerged of viewers vomiting or passing out during screenings. What makes the scene so effective isn't just the violence, though there's plenty of that. It's the commitment to realism. Iñárritu and cinematographer Emanuel Lubezki shot the entire film using only natural light, which meant the bear attack had to be meticulously planned and executed. They used a combination of CGI and a stunt performer in a bear suit to create something that feels completely real. The bear doesn't just attack, it mauls. It throws Glass around like a rag doll, it bites his throat, and the camera never cuts away. DiCaprio trained for months to prepare for the scene. He studied actual bear attack footage and worked with movement coordinators to make his reactions authentic. The result is a performance that feels genuinely terrifying. You believe this man is being torn apart by an animal that weighs 800 pounds. The sound design enhances the horror. You hear bones cracking, flesh tearing, Glass gasping for air. It's overwhelming. The film doesn't stop with the bear attack. The entire runtime is an endurance test. Glass crawls through snow with infected wounds. He cauterizes injuries with gunpowder. He guts a horse and sleeps inside its carcass. He falls off a cliff. Every scene is designed to push the limits of what audiences can tolerate. And it worked. The Revenant made over 500 million worldwide, but it also prompted countless walkouts. What's interesting is how the violence serves the story. This isn't gratuitous. Iñárritu is showing what survival actually looked like on the American frontier. There were no hospitals, no antibiotics, no rescue helicopters. If you got hurt, you either survived through sheer willpower or you died. The film doesn't romanticize any of it. The frontier was brutal, and Glass's survival was miraculous precisely because the odds were so completely stacked against him. Critics praised the technical achievement, but some questioned whether the violence was necessary. Did we need to see every detail of the bear attack? Did the film need to linger on Glass's suffering for 2.5 hours? Iñárritu's answer was yes. He wanted audiences to understand what Glass endured, and you can't do that with cutaways and implied violence. You have to show it. The Revenant divided audiences precisely because it refused to look away from the brutality of frontier life, and that unflinching gaze made it one of the most talked about westerns in decades. Number 9, Django, 1966.
Say that I consider it a great honor that you fine people have chosen.
Sergio Corbucci directed this spaghetti western the same year Leone was making The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly, and he decided to out-violence everyone. Django is about a mysterious gunfighter who drags a coffin through the mud and gets caught between Mexican revolutionaries and a gang of racist vigilantes. It's bleak, nihilistic, and so graphically violent that it was banned in multiple countries for decades. Franco Nero plays Django, and he brings a cold, almost emotionless presence to the role. This isn't a hero. This is a man consumed by revenge who happens to be on the slightly less evil side of the conflict. The film opens with him watching a woman being whipped and tortured. He calls her attackers without hesitation, but there's no sense of righteousness, just pragmatic violence. That sets the tone for everything that follows. The most notorious scene involves Django cutting off a man's ear and forcing him to eat it. It happens early in the film and establishes immediately that Corbucci wasn't playing by the usual rules. This wasn't Hollywood violence where people get shot and fall down cleanly. This was nasty, up-close brutality that felt personal and cruel. The scene got the film banned outright in the UK until 1993. It was heavily censored across Europe and completely prohibited in several countries. But the ear scene isn't even the most violent moment. Later, Django's hands are crushed by Mexican bandits who stomp on them repeatedly until the bones shatter. The film shows it in detail. No cutaways, no mercy. Then Django has to figure out how to shoot with ruined hands in the final confrontation. He rests his gun on a cross in a cemetery and uses the trigger guard to fire. It's both brutal and oddly poetic. Corbucci shot Django in Spain on a low budget, using the same locations where Leone was filming. The landscape is bleak, muddy, and oppressive. There's no romanticized Wild West here. Just a miserable border town filled with miserable people doing terrible things to each other. The film's visual style influenced countless westerns that followed, but few matched its nihilism. Django was a massive hit in Europe despite, or maybe because of, the controversy. It spawned over 30 unofficial sequels, though Nero only returned for one official sequel decades later. The film's influence on Tarantino is obvious. He named a character after Django in his own western, and he's called Corbucci one of his favorite directors. The violence that got Django banned is exactly what made it revolutionary. The ending is particularly bleak. Django survives, but he's broken physically and spiritually. There's no triumph, no redemption, just a damaged man limping away from more corpses. That refusal to provide catharsis or moral clarity is what made Django so controversial and why it remains one of the most brutal westerns ever made. Number 8. A Fistful of Dynamite, 1971. Sergio Leone's most overlooked western is also one of his most violent. Originally titled Duck, You Sucker, this film about the Mexican Revolution features mass executions, torture, and a body count that rivals war movies. Leone was moving away from the mythic westerns of his Dollars trilogy towards something more political and cynical, and the violence reflects that shift. James Coburn plays John Mallory, an Irish explosives expert on the run from the British. Rod Steiger plays Juan Miranda, a Mexican bandit who accidentally becomes a revolutionary hero. The two form an unlikely partnership that leads them deeper into the revolution's brutality. Leone doesn't romanticize the revolution. He shows it as chaotic, bloody, and ultimately pointless. People die by the hundreds, and nothing really changes. The film's most shocking sequence involves a mass execution. Mexican federales line up prisoners against a wall and machine gun them down. Leone films it in his trademark style, extreme close-ups of faces intercut with wide shots of carnage. But unlike his earlier westerns where violence was stylized and almost balletic, here it's ugly and senseless. Bodies crumple, blood sprays. There's no glory in any of it. Another disturbing scene shows Juan discovering that his entire family, women and children included, have been executed by government forces. Their bodies are displayed publicly as a warning. The scene is brief but devastating. Leone doesn't linger on the corpses, but the implication is clear. This is what war does. It doesn't just call soldiers. It destroys families, communities, entire ways of life. The film also features extended torture sequences that made censors nervous. Prisoners are beaten for information. A character is cold by having dynamite strapped to his body. The violence is more grounded than Leone's previous westerns, which made it harder to dismiss as fantasy. This felt real, and that made audiences uncomfortable. A Fistful of Dynamite was Leone's most expensive film at the time, costing over $5 million. But it bombed in America. United Artists barely promoted it, and the version they released was cut and retitled. American audiences expecting another Clint Eastwood adventure got a long, politically complex film about Mexican history instead. The violence didn't help. This wasn't fun spaghetti western violence. It was angry political violence that indicted everyone involved in the conflict. Over time, the film has been reassessed. Critics now recognize it as one of Leone's most mature works, a bridge between his operatic westerns and his masterpiece Once Upon a Time in America. The violence that initially repelled audiences is now seen as integral to Leone's political message. Revolution isn't romantic. It's bloody, chaotic, and the people who suffer most are usually the ones who had no choice about participating. Number 7. The Great Silence, 1968. Sergio Corbucci made another ultra-violent Western just 2 years after Django, and this one might be even more brutal. The Great Silence takes place in a snow-covered Utah during a blizzard, and it's one of the bleakest, most nihilistic Westerns ever made. The violence isn't just graphic, it's pointless and depressing, and the film ends with the villains winning. That alone made it controversial, but the journey to that ending is filled with casual cruelty that shocked audiences. Jean-Louis Trintignant plays Silence, a mute gunfighter who kills bounty hunters for revenge. Klaus Kinski plays Loco, a bounty hunter who massacres outlaws for profit. The film sets up what looks like a traditional Western showdown between good and evil, then systematically subverts every expectation. Silence isn't a hero, he's a killer motivated purely by vengeance. Loco isn't a villain, he's just a man doing a legal job. The real villains are the systems that make bounty hunting profitable and turn desperate people into outlaws. The violence in The Great Silence is quick and ugly. People don't die dramatically, they just stop moving. Corbucci films it all in stark white landscapes where blood stands out vividly against snow. It's beautiful and horrifying at the same time. The contrast between the pristine setting and the brutality of human behavior creates a constant visual dissonance. The most shocking element is the ending. In traditional Westerns, the hero wins, justice prevails. But in The Great Silence, Loco shoots silence, calls all the outlaws who were seeking refuge, and rides away unpunished. The final image is of corpses in the snow. No redemption, no hope, just death. Italian audiences were so upset that Corbucci shot an alternate happy ending, but he refused to use it for the main release. The film was banned or heavily cut in several countries. The combination of graphic violence and nihilistic worldview was too much for censors who expected Westerns to uphold certain moral values. The Great Silence suggested that justice was a lie, that the strong always prevail, and that resistance was futile. That message, delivered through stark violence in a frozen wasteland, was more than most audiences could handle. Ennio Morricone's score adds to the bleakness. Instead of triumphant themes, the music is mournful and oppressive. It sounds like a funeral march, which is appropriate given how the film ends. Every element works together to create one of cinema's most despairing Westerns. A film that argues the frontier wasn't about opportunity or freedom, but about power and exploitation. Number 6. Soldier Blue, 1970. Ralph Nelson directed this revisionist Western about the Sand Creek Massacre, and it's so graphically violent in its depiction of genocide that it was banned in several countries and remains controversial today. Soldier Blue came out during the Vietnam War, and the parallels were intentional. Nelson wanted Americans to confront their own history of atrocities, and he did it by showing a cavalry massacre of a Cheyenne village in unflinching detail. The film stars Candice Bergen and Peter Strauss as survivors of a Cheyenne attack who journey across hostile territory, trying to reach a cavalry fort. Most of the film is a relatively standard survival story, with some social commentary about how Native Americans were portrayed. Then the final 20 minutes arrive, and the film becomes almost unwatchable. The cavalry attacks a peaceful Cheyenne village, and Nelson shows everything. Women and children are shot, stabbed, and mutilated. Pregnant women are cold, babies are murdered, soldiers cut off body parts as trophies. The violence is explicit, prolonged, and designed to sicken the audience. Nelson based it on eyewitness accounts of the real Sand Creek Massacre in 1864, where Colorado militia culled over 150 Cheyenne and Arapaho, mostly women, children, and elderly. The real event was as bad or worse than what's shown in the film. The massacre sequence runs nearly 15 minutes and feels longer because it's so relentless. There's no heroic intervention, no last-minute rescue, just systematic slaughter while Strauss's character watches in horror, unable to stop it. The scene was so controversial that many theaters refused to show the film. Those that did faced protests. Critics were divided between praising Nelson's courage and condemning the graphic violence as exploitative. The film was banned outright in Sweden and heavily censored across Europe. Even in America, it received an X rating initially, which would have limited its distribution severely. The rating was later changed to R after some cuts, but the damage was done. Soldier Blue was marked as too extreme for mainstream audiences. Nelson defended the violence by pointing out that this actually happened. Americans committed genocide against native peoples, and pretending it was less brutal than it was serves no one. The sanitized westerns of previous decades had lied about frontier history, turning massacres into heroic battles. Nelson wanted to correct that lie, even if it meant making audiences uncomfortable. Number 5. Ulzana's Raid, 1972. Robert Aldrich directed this brutal western about an Apache warrior's raid through Arizona, and it's one of the most unflinching depictions of frontier violence ever filmed. Ulzana's Raid doesn't take sides. It shows atrocities committed by both Apache raiders and cavalry soldiers, suggesting that violence begets violence until everyone involved becomes a monster. That moral ambiguity, combined with graphic depictions of torture and murder, made it one of the most controversial westerns of the 70s. Burt Lancaster plays McIntosh, a veteran scout guiding a young, idealistic cavalry officer, played by Bruce Davison in pursuit of Ulzana, an Apache warrior who's escaped the reservation with a small band of followers. The film opens with the aftermath of a raid. A man has been tortured to death. His wife has been raped and mutilated. The farmhouse is burned. It's immediately clear this won't be a typical Western. What makes Ulzana's Raid so disturbing is how it presents the violence as rational from the Apache perspective. They're not mindless savages. They're warriors fighting a war they know they've already lost, trying to gather power through violence before they're inevitably cold or recaptured. The torture and mutilation serve religious and practical purposes within their worldview. Aldrich doesn't judge this. He simply presents it and lets audiences grapple with the implications. The film shows multiple brutal attacks. A woman is rapied and cold while her husband is forced to watch. A soldier is staked out in the sun to die slowly. Bodies are mutilated in ways that serve Apache spiritual beliefs about preventing enemies from entering the afterlife whole. None of it is shown exploitatively. Aldrich films it all matter-of-factly, which somehow makes it worse. But the film also shows cavalry atrocities. When they capture an Apache woman, the soldiers debate whether to coal her or let her go. The decision is pragmatic, not moral. Later, they massacre an Apache camp, calling everyone, including women, who weren't part of the raiding party. The parallel is clear. Both sides commit atrocities. Both sides justify them, and the cycle continues until everyone is dead. Lancaster gives one of his best late career performances as a man who understands both cultures and is appalled by both. He knows why the Apaches fight the way they do, but he also knows it's a war they can't win. His character represents the impossibility of maintaining moral clarity in a situation where survival requires compromising your values constantly. By the end, even he's exhausted by the violence. Ulzana's Raid was released during the final years of the Vietnam War, and the parallels were obvious to contemporary audiences. Here was another film about a powerful military force hunting an indigenous enemy through hostile terrain, finding that conventional warfare doesn't work, and resorting to increasingly brutal tactics. The film doesn't preach, but the subtext is impossible to miss. Number 4, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid.
So how about you present me with this war, and I'll show you a lesson.
1973. Sam Peckinpah's elegiac western about the hunt for Billy the Kid is famous for its troubled production and multiple cuts, but what often gets overlooked is how brutally violent it is. Peckinpah doesn't use his trademark slow-motion ballet of death here. Instead, the violence is quick, ugly, and painful. People get gut shot and die slowly, screaming. It's some of the most realistic gunfight violence ever filmed in a western. James Coburn plays Pat Garrett, the former outlaw turned lawman hunting his old friend Billy the Kid, played by Chris Christopherson. The film follows Garrett's reluctant pursuit while showing Billy's last days of freedom. What makes the violence so effective is how Peckinpah films the consequences. When someone gets shot, they don't just fall down. They writhe in agony, clutching their wounds, begging for help that won't come. The most disturbing sequence involves a deputy getting gut shot during an ambush. He takes minutes to die, bleeding out while calling for his wife. Peckinpah holds on the scene, forcing you to watch a man's agonizing death. There's nothing heroic about it. It's just painful and sad. Another scene shows a turkey shoot where men kill chickens for sport, their casual cruelty mirroring the human violence throughout the film. The studio hated what Peckinpah delivered, MGM wanted a straightforward action western. They got a slow, melancholic meditation on aging, betrayal, and the death of the Old West. They cut the film brutally, removing over 20 minutes and changing the structure. The theatrical version flopped, making just over $11 million on a $4 million budget. Critics were confused by the disjointed narrative. Decades later, a restored version closer to Peckinpah's vision was released, and the film was reassessed as one of his best. But at the time, the combination of graphic violence and narrative incoherence made it unwatchable for many audiences. Theater owners complained. Some pulled it early. The violence wasn't stylized like The Wild Bunch. It was just ugly and depressing, which is exactly what Peckinpah intended. He was showing the death of a myth. Number 3. The Wild Bunch, 1969. This is the film that changed everything. Sam Peckinpah's masterpiece about aging outlaws in 1913. Mexico was so graphically violent that theater owners actually sued the studio, claiming the film would cause riots and demanding it be pulled from distribution. The lawsuit failed, but it showed how deeply the Wild Bunch disturbed people. This wasn't violence as entertainment, this was violence as art, and audiences weren't ready for it. The film opens with the bunch robbing a railroad office while temperance marchers parade through town. The robbery goes wrong, a massive shootout erupts, and Peckinpah unleashes violence unlike anything American audiences had seen. He uses slow motion, multiple cameras at different speeds, and rapid editing to create a ballet of death. Bodies explode, blood sprays. Innocent bystanders get caught in the crossfire. Children watch and laugh. That opening shootout runs nearly 15 minutes and features over 300 edits. Peckinpah shot it with 6 cameras running at different speeds, then cut it together to create a rhythm that's almost musical. The violence is beautiful and horrifying simultaneously. You can't look away, but you're also appalled by what you're seeing. That tension is what made theater owners panic. The final shootout is even more extreme. The bunch, betrayed and facing certain death, walks into a Mexican army camp and opens fire. What follows is 5 minutes of sustained carnage. Hundreds of people die. Machine guns tear through crowds. Bodies pile up. The bunch themselves are riddled with bullets, but keep fighting until they literally can't stand anymore. It's operatic, excessive, and utterly unforgettable. The MPAA initially threatened an X rating. Warner Brothers fought back, arguing the film was a serious artistic statement about violence, not exploitation. They won, getting an R rating, but barely. When the film opened, protests erupted outside theaters. Some critics called it a masterpiece. Others called it fascist pornography. Roger Ebert wrote that he wasn't sure if it was a good film, but he knew it was important. Number 2. Bone Tomahawk, 2015. SS. Craig Zahler's horror western came out of nowhere and traumatized audiences with one scene so brutal that it's become legendary among genre fans and casual viewers alike. Bone Tomahawk is about a rescue mission into cannibal territory, and for most of its runtime, it plays as a slow-burn western with exceptional dialogue and character development. Then the rescue party finds the cannibals' cave, and the film transforms into one of the most graphically violent westerns ever made. A shift so jarring that it left audiences genuinely shaken. The scene everyone talks about, the one that's earned infamy across horror and Western communities, involves a man being split in half vertically from groin to head while he's still alive and conscious. The cannibals strip him naked, hang him upside down, and use a tomahawk to methodically split him down the middle. The camera doesn't cut away. You see everything. The practical effects are sickeningly realistic, achieved through meticulous prosthetic work that makes the impossible to watch feel disturbingly real. Audiences at festival screenings gasped, screamed, covered their eyes, or simply walked out. Some viewers reported feeling physically ill. Others said they couldn't sleep afterward. What makes the violence so effective, so deeply disturbing, isn't just the graphic nature, it's the build-up. The film takes its time getting to the cave, spending nearly 90 minutes developing characters and relationships. You get to know these men, understand their motivations, and care about their survival. Sheriff Hunt is dignified and brave. Chicory is loyal and funny. Bruder is damaged but determined. Then Zahler systematically destroys them in the most horrific ways possible. It's not random violence or cheap shock tactics. It's the culmination of a journey into literal hell, and the film makes you understand that these characters never had a chance against something this primal and evil. Kurt Russell, Patrick Wilson, Matthew Fox, and Richard Jenkins make up the rescue party, and they're all excellent, bringing depth to what could have been stock Western characters. The dialogue is Zahler's greatest strength. These men talk like real frontier people, their speech formal and profane simultaneously, mixing educated vocabulary with crude frontier expressions. That linguistic realism makes the horror elements hit exponentially harder. This isn't a fantasy world with fantasy rules. These feel like authentic men from the 1890s encountering something impossibly, incomprehensibly evil. The film had no major studio backing and was released quietly through smaller distributors who weren't sure what to do with it. But it found a devoted audience through word of mouth, specifically people warning others about the split scene while simultaneously insisting the film was too good to miss. Zahler became known overnight as a director willing to push boundaries far beyond what mainstream cinema would tolerate, and he's made 2 more ultra-violent films since, Brawl in Cell Block 99 and Dragged Across Concrete. But nothing he's done has topped Bone Tomahawk's notorious moment of horror. It's a scene that's impossible to forget, impossible to unsee, and genuinely difficult to recommend to anyone with a weak stomach. Yet the film surrounding it is so well crafted that it demands to be seen. Number 1. The Nightingale, 2019. Jennifer Kent's follow-up to The Babadook is the most brutal, confrontational, and politically charged Western on this list. A film so relentlessly violent and unflinching in its depiction of colonial atrocities that it sparked international controversy. Set in 1825 Tasmania during British colonial rule, The Nightingale follows an Irish convict woman seeking revenge against the British soldiers who murdered her family and raped her repeatedly. The violence is explicit, prolonged, and deliberately designed to make audiences understand the true horror of colonialism and systemic rape as weapons of conquest and control. Multiple international festivals saw mass walkouts. Some theaters refused to screen it entirely. Others posted warnings so severe that attendance dropped dramatically. The film opens with a rape scene that runs several agonizing minutes. Kent doesn't cut away, doesn't soften the horror with camera angles or editing tricks. She forces viewers to witness the assault in real time, and it's genuinely unbearable to watch. This isn't titillation or exploitation. It's documentation of horror presented with clinical, unflinching honesty. Later, soldiers murder the woman's husband and infant daughter while she watches helplessly, unable to stop them, unable to do anything but scream. That scene caused the most dramatic walkouts at the Venice Film Festival premiere. Dozens of people fled the theater. Some never returned. Kent faced immediate accusations of exploiting trauma for shock value, of crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. She defended her artistic choices by pointing out that these atrocities actually happened, constantly and systematically throughout colonial history. Pretending they didn't occur or sanitizing them for audience comfort serves no one except those who want to forget. Aisling Franciosi delivers a devastating performance as Claire, the convict seeking revenge. Sam Claflin plays Lieutenant Hawkins, the officer who destroyed her life, and he's terrifyingly believable as a man who sees violence against the powerless as his natural right. Baikali Ganambar plays Billy, an Aboriginal tracker helping Claire navigate the wilderness while dealing with his own profound trauma. The film follows their pursuit through the brutal Tasmanian landscape while showing parallel atrocities committed against Aboriginal people. British soldiers rape Aboriginal women with impunity. They massacre entire families. They treat Indigenous people as subhuman obstacles to be removed or exploited, their lives worth less than nothing. Kent's central argument, delivered through uncompromising imagery, is that this violence wasn't exceptional or aberrant. It was official policy, the standard operating procedure of British colonization. The British colonized Tasmania through systematic RP, murder, and genocide, and The Nightingale refuses to let viewers distance themselves from that historical reality. Every assault is shown in excruciating detail. Every murder is witnessed completely. The film runs over 2 hours of sustained brutality with only brief moments of respite. Critics called it punishing, emotionally devastating, almost unwatchable. That's exactly what Kent intended. The film was barely released in America, receiving only limited theatrical distribution. The Nightingale made less than $2 million worldwide, despite overwhelmingly strong reviews from critics who could handle its intensity. Audiences simply didn't want to endure this much documented trauma, even when presented with historical accuracy and clear artistic justification. But Kent achieved precisely what she set out to accomplish. She created a film about colonial violence that doesn't allow viewers any comfortable distance, any easy moralizing, any escape from confronting what colonialism actually meant for its victims. These 10 westerns refuse to sanitize frontier violence or provide easy moral answers. They showed the brutality of the American West without filters, and audiences punished them for it. Some were banned, some flopped, but all of them pushed boundaries and forced conversations about how much violent cinema should show and why.